one told you life was gonna be this way? Your job's a joke, you broke, your love life's the old way. It's like you're always stuck in second gear. When it hasn't been your day, or maybe your month, or even your year. But I'll be there for you.
Orale way! Welcome back to Mr. D's class. Hopefully you did well on that exam. Let's get back into the game. This series of lectures is called the Post-Revolutionary State. We're looking at how things were after the revolution from 1910 to about 1917 to 16. And today's lecture is called After Carranza. So let's begin with last class. So last time we learned about Pancho Villa and Zapata and how they were defeated at the Battle of Celaya by Obregon and Carranza, mainly Obregon. After that defeat, now that they ruled the country, there was a growing division between Obregon and Carranza on how they wanted to craft this new constitution. Whereas Carranza was uninterested in supporting his old enemy's cause, the causes of both Villa and Zapata, in helping basically with labor rights and land rights. And by the way, he also had Zapata assassinated. That was pretty intense last time. Obregon, on the other hand, wanted a more progressive, revolutionary constitution that reflected the issues all these people fought for in the first place, like land issues, gender inequality, workers' rights, the role of the church, education, laws in the court, fairness in the courtroom, etc. It was a huge deal, and it eventually sided with Obregon, which was a big, big deal. Now, over the course of the 4 years where Carranza was president, he made enemies with the workers, who unionized under CROM, which we'll talk about again today, and eventually even the military began to favor Obregon, the caudillos, and they called for his ouster, his removal of presidency. It got so bad that he had to eventually flee to Veracruz. Unfortunately for Carranza, he was killed along the way. His death closes this chapter on those who participated in that revolution, taking leading roles. Now from this point forward, Obregon and beyond, with Calles and Cardenas and other leaders, we're going to see if they can actually make that 1917 revolution a reality. So let's review, because this has been a really complicated journey. Hopefully you understood this for your exam, and if you didn't, well, now you're going to know it. You're going to learn it now, let me tell you. We began this lecture series with Porfirio Diaz against Benito Juarez. Juarez was the Mexican independence war hero who ran for like 4 terms. Eventually he died, and Porfirio Diaz became a tyrant for 35 more years. And under his rule, it was very pro-business at the cost of the Mexican people. It got so bad after 35 years, and he got cocky. Remember, he told the world, I think I'm going to stop running. Madero ran, and then Madero was eventually imprisoned for running against him. And it began this whole revolution in which Madero, Orozco, Villa, and Zapata joined forces to end Porfirio Diaz's reign over Mexico. After he was eventually exiled, Madero became the president. But Madero made a series of political mistakes. If you remember, he didn't really introduce the labor reforms or the land reforms like he should have. And basically, instead of getting Orozco on his team, he made the mistake of getting one of Porfirio Diaz's old military guys, Victoriano Huerta, who will eventually backstab and kill Madero in that tragic Diez Diaz, if you remember. So what begins with a revolution against Madero continues on against General Huerta, and it'll be Orozco, Zapata, and Villa once again joining forces against Huerta. Now, when Huerta took over, he was challenged by, Villa, Zapata, and some new folks we hadn't heard of before, like Venustiano Carranza, who was supported by Woodrow Wilson. If you remember, Woodrow Wilson did not like Huerta. He had blood on his hands. He did not. Wilson's all about moral diplomacy. Huerta is an evil dude. And Carranza's able to get an amazing general to join him, Álvaro Obregón, who is currently the leader. So this is when they fought against Huerta. Eventually, they defeated Huerta. He was exiled and he got killed in America for, talking to Germany during the Zimmerman telegram days. And then the last chapter of our little civil war begins, in which Villa and Zapata will align against Carranza and Obregón. Why? It's because in 1915, there was a convention in which all interested parties met up. It asked for Carranza to step down, which he would not. It also asked for Villa to lay down his guns and for them to put forward the Plan de Ayala that Zapata had been fighting so long for. This final stage of the Civil War basically put Obregon, the general, against Pancho Villa at the Battle of Celaya, which Villa gets decimated by American guns. Always America involved in some way, right? Whether it's the assassination of Madero or the Battle of Celaya. And eventually, we see Venustiano Carranza win the presidency. Now, last class, we talked about his disastrous 4 years as president, in which he made a lot of enemies. And eventually, Obregon would not only take over, but assassinate him. And lots of assassinations. Everybody on this page, except for Obregon, is dead. And everybody on this page. It's pretty insane if you think about it. Let's, one more time, re-examine who Obregon was.
From a very young age, Alvaro Obregon worked in the fields here at Huatabampo, Sonora, his home since childhood. He joined the revolution in 1912 to fight Pascual Orozco's rebellion against Francisco Madero. After Orozco's defeat and the revolution's apparent triumph, he returned to working the land. In 1913, following Madero's assassination, Obregon joined the revolution again to support Venustiano Carranza in his struggle against Victoriano Huerta. He was appointed leader of the War Department and embarked on a campaign in northern Sonora where he took control of Nogales, Agua Prieta, and Naco. This is the town of Santa Rosa in Sonora. Here in May 1913, Obregon achieved an important victory for the Constitutionalists, later becoming leader of Carranza's armed forces. 200 years of being proudly Mexican. This is the bicentennial.
All right. Obregon, the start of a lot of good in Mexico after a horrible 7 to 8 years of the Civil War. Let's pause so you can write this down. All right, so after Carranza's death, Obregon came forward with Plutarco Calles, if you remember. Calles and De la Huerta are the ones that put forward the Plan de Agua Prieta. All right, this is the one that was against Carranza. And these are three men from Sonora, the northwest Mexican state. And they took over the national government. Here's what they did initially. First and foremost, they had to deal with Pancho Villa. I mistakenly said that he had died. He's not dead yet. And basically, they gave him land, gave him money to have him and all of his northern generals finally retire. But that won't be the end of Villa. They had elections, which Obregon won. He was very popular compared to anybody before him. And these are the big issues they had to deal with. First and foremost, during this 10-year war, 1.3 million Mexicans died. It was awful. Moreover, World War I, as you remember, ends in 1919, and now it's the 1920s. And there's a global recession after all that demand for oil and weaponry is way down. And of course, if you've noticed a theme here, there's always the threat of a military takeover if you're a Mexican leader. Pretty much everybody before Obregon has died in some way, shape, or form. He freaking killed Carranza, the leader before him. Now, ingeniously, and this is how he managed to stay in power for as long as he did, he would rotate his military generals so that they would never, stay in a region too long. They would keep moving around the country. That way they would never be able to gain people to join their forces and become another revolutionary threat. Moreover, if anybody seemed to be gaining a lot of political clout, he would immediately pay off, whether it was a governor or a businessman who owned a lot of industry or a general, he'd pay off people to keep him loyal. So, that famous Mexican saying, el que no tranza no avanza, that which doesn't cheat doesn't get far in Mexican politics. It's very true. Finally, the reason why Mexico was able to remain afloat during this difficult economic time is because at this point they were the second largest oil producer in the world. And you know who was buying up their oil? America, baby. World War I had created enormous amounts of demand during this time. So, one more time, that Plan de Guadalupe, just so you can see it here. Here's some people that put it forward. Obregon, Calles, De la Huerta. These are the people that put forward that plan. And here you can see them one more time. Calles right here will play a large role in the upcoming lectures. This guy is one sneaky dude. Mexico, it resulted in millions of people getting killed. Here we can see some burned bodies and happy Mexicans next to it. It cut the population by an entire percentage point here. 1.4 million excess deaths in this time. It was a pretty bad time, and that's why when you look at Mexican paintings, there's always a lot of skeletons and death. It is a form of remembrance for such a sad time in its history. Have you finally retired, Pancho, or are you going to come back for more fun in the future? Only time will tell. Here we can see the oil fields where there's a lot of oil in this Gulf right here, and this is what they were extracting to buy and sell to the Americans. Let me remind you about that Constitution of 1917. It's a very important Constitution. It is one of the most advanced of its time, and it's fair game. A lot of examination questions are going to be on that Constitution, so you'd be well to learn that and some of the more important articles.
In 1916, when the struggle was decided in Venustiano Carranza's favor, he called elections to form a constituent Congress and present his proposed amendments to the Constitution of 1857. Here in Querétaro, deputies representing almost the entire country assembled to discuss, amend, and make additions to the proposal, tailoring it to Mexico's new social reality. Articles 3, 123, and 27 were tangible proof of the Mexican Revolution's ideals, embodying as they did significant advances regarding education, labor, and territorial sovereignty. On February 5, 1917, the Constitution was proclaimed at the Theater of the Republic. Due to its social content, this Magna Charta, still applicable today, was considered one of the most progressive in the world. 200 years of being proudly Mexican. This is the bicentennial.
Pretty revolutionary stuff. Let me pause so you can write down the second slide. All right, so labor and agri-reform. This is pretty boring stuff, I'm not going to lie to you, so let's see if we can plow through it. Obregon knew that he needed organized labor to be on his side. Remember the people who Carranza made enemies with, CROM, the Regional Confederation of Mexican Workers. It was led by a man named Luis Morones. Now, Morones, in the 2 years that he was leading the CROM union, he was able to get it to be from 400,000 members to over 1 million people as a part of this huge union. And because people were part of a union, they could fight for higher wages. Strikes were at an all-time low, even though economically it was not a great time in the early 1920s in Mexico. Now, concerning land reform, as you can imagine, the Zapata state of Morelos had earned their damn right to get some of their land back. They had fought during the entire revolution. So they put forward a law called Agrarian Regulatory Law of 1922, basically allowing for the local communities to establish whatever land they feel needs to be distributed to the people. So long as it was approved upward, eventually to the president to stamp off, it was fair game. And under this law, they eventually gave 2.5 million acres, remember acres are football fields, mostly in Morelos, because that's where they were really fighting for it. And they needed their future support to not, because that's a very rambunctious group, as you can imagine. They've been fighting the entire revolution. They were a crazy bunch. Now, it was relatively little compared to future reform, but it seemed legitimate enough to not have anybody question Obregon's intentions, and that's the important thing. But keep in mind that in this time, Mexico is still owned by just over 2,000 families, the entire country, which is really, really sad. But that's the case for many Latin American countries. Here we can see Morones, in charge of CROM, this huge union, and we can see Confederación Regional Obrera Mexicana, and that was the great unionizer. Here we can see a painting of Zapata, La tierra es de quien la trabaja, the earth is for he who works it. All right. Here's a great video that I found on a people's history, and this really reflects on why it was important to do this and the role Obregon played. For better or for worse, it has a bit of a negative tone, but it's the truth.
With Álvaro Obregón in the presidency, Villa accepted his retirement, but continued to plan a return to the struggle, until, of course, he was also assassinated on July 20th, 1923. As President of Mexico, Álvaro Obregón had made some social progress, but it was not everything that the Revolución had promised. By 1924, the country did not have a full social and political revolution, as had been hoped for by so many people. Before Álvaro Obregón left the presidency, he gave the presidential dedazo to Plutarco Elias Calles, a man who claimed to be a revolutionary, but in his actions was closer to a Porfiriato-style dictator. And there was a new sector of corrupt Mexicans ready and willing to take advantage of the revolution to make themselves rich, filling their pockets with stolen money, while at the same time filling their mouths with slogans of La Revolución. These were the same people that founded the Partido Nacional Revolucionario in 1929, which would later become the PRI.
Sad stuff, I know, the way she says it. Anyways, last slide for today, and I know this is one of the more boring lectures, but we got to go through it. It's important stuff. It's definitely fair game for the exam. I'll let you copy. All right, so let's talk about the foreign recognition of Mexico. Mexico has been through a civil war now for about almost a decade, and Obregon had to balance gaining back worldwide legitimacy as a country without having the world take advantage of Mexico like it had for the past about century. All right, so remember, Mexico is producing 25% of the world's petroleum. It is the second largest producer. And basically, the idea was that they were going to begin taxing the oil revenues to help out with the destroyed economy of 1.3 million dead and all the artillery fire. I mean, all those videos we saw of the war happening, they had to be repaired. Mexico needed to be fixed. Now, America was buying 75% of the oil from Mexico, so any taxes, any additional money spent would really, really piss off the Americans, which eventually forced them to sign the Bucurelli Treaty of 1923. It was between Calvin Coolidge and Obregon. Well, really it was between someone representing Obregon. And the idea is this. Companies will be protected. American companies will be protected from Article 27. 27 is that takeover of foreigners' property in Mexico, so long as America recognized that Obregon was the proper government. To get into the specifics, basically, Mexico would not tax anything created in Mexico before 1917, before that constitution. Anything that is taken after 1917, when theoretically, the United States had an awareness that this could happen, that if they do build any oil fields after 1917, that theoretically the Mexicans, it's their constitution now, they could take it. It is in their laws. If they're going to take it, though, they have to pay for what they take using the new tax revenue. So America wanted to protect its assets in Mexico, especially those before 1917 when it was completely unaware of this constitution. I hope that makes sense. It's a pretty complicated treaty, but, it was the only way that Mexico could gain basically recognition Obregon as the new leader, and Calvin Coolidge was really upset about that, Sal and Cal. Now, last thing to talk about education. Under a very amazing guy, Jose Vasconcelos, he is the first person to really take the Article 3 and transfer it into an actual reality. He built 1,000 schools, mostly in rural areas where the indigenous people live. He taught Spanish to people that spoke, old school Aztec or Mayan languages, basics on nutrition and hygiene, and he provided cheap textbooks for teachers to be able to, give their students something. He created public libraries, but, for the sake of this PowerPoint, what I love about him is that he created the muralist movement. He is the one, we're going to spend an entire lecture talking about these muralists. He is the one that put forward Sequeiros and Rivera and all these amazing muralists that when you go to Mexico one day, especially in the capital, in the DF, you will see these amazingly huge paintings, and you will understand the story behind them now. So, here we can see the Bucurelli Treaty between Sal Cal and Obregon, the one-armed man. It basically protects pre-1917 oil fields from Article 27 of the Constitution so that they can't be nationalized. And Jose Vasconcelos, he's the one that one more time paid for that muralist movement. Next time, we're going to be talking about Plutarco Calles, all right? El Maximato. This is a tricky dude right here. All right, I hope you enjoyed.